You're watching PIX on Politics Daily with Dan Mannarino.
Hi there, I'm Henry Rossoff, and welcome to PIX on Politics Daily, where we go over everything on Fridays from the week. And this week, there was really only one story. It would be the New York City budget and the estimated $5.4 billion deficit that Mayor Zohran Mamdani is threatening to perhaps fill with a property tax hike. And that really did not go over well, including with the City Council. So today, we have City Council Finance Chair Linda Lee, who also represents Queens, joining us. Councilmember Lee, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's
So
great to be here.
Talk to me about the mayor's notion. We'll start with the top line news of a potential property tax hike to fill this hole. The council views this as a non-starter, yes?
Yes. So first of all, when we're talking about an affordability crisis, which of course the mayor and the council, everyone we recognize, a lot of New Yorkers are struggling. This sort of surprise that we got on Tuesday about the potential property tax rate increases, doesn't seem to make sense or fit in with that narrative during a time where so many people are struggling. And so, for us, first of all, the property tax increases haven't happened since 2008. So it has not happened for a long time. And the property tax system as we know it is really broken. And so if we were to talk about increasing property taxes, that would actually impact a lot of the working class families the most, where they would actually be burdened to pay for a lot of those increases. And so you're hurting a lot of Black and brown families, especially ones in my district.
Fixed income seniors, as I understand, who have legacy properties for a number of years.
Exactly, who have legacy properties. A lot of immigrant homeowners. I have 45% AAPIs in my district, very booming and growing population. A lot of them are, for example, taxi, Lyft, Uber drivers that have really spent a long time trying to build this generational wealth. And so now we're saying, we could potentially be raising your property taxes, which is definitely tone deaf during this time. And especially when homeowners insurance, car insurances, every type of insurance you can name is already increasing. And so it really adds a lot of burden to a lot of these homeowners that already are struggling and renters.
The mayor is framing this as a choice, and we can talk about whether you agree or disagree with the framing, but let's first talk about how he's framing it. He says Albany needs to give a millionaires and or corporate tax in lieu of this to fill the hole. So is the council generally, realizing you don't directly control this, but is the council generally supportive of a millionaires and an increase in the corporate tax rate?
We believe, and I'll say this over and over again, we believe that before we even get to that point of talking about personal income tax increases or property tax increases, we believe that there are a lot of savings that are still left to be found. For example, the comptroller's report pretty much every year says that city agencies end up at a surplus, right? And so are there ways that we can look at efficiencies? Are there ways that we can look at agency spending to see where are some of those gaps that we can fill before we even get to that point? So I think there's a lot of room still left to look at those numbers. And then also, the state, I know the governor just announced earlier this week with the mayor that they're going to be doing some cost shifts and giving us an additional $1.5 billion. Mm-hmm. That includes a lot of things that we were fighting for last week at Tin Cup Day in Albany. So it's $60 million to help us with Article 6, which is essentially filling the gaps of healthcare, public health costs. Ames funding, which typically, was taken away by Cuomo during the de Blasio
New York
years.
it's essentially a fund to help local governments with their budget situations. New York City was the only municipality in the state not getting it. Just to play catch up for our viewers at home. No,
totally.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So we were left out of that for many, many years. And so that was funding that was put back. Also the foundation aid funding.
For schools.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So what we were fighting for was, okay, obviously the formula is set, but can we give a little bit more weight to English learners, language learners, as well as children that are in temporary shelters and homeless, right? So she did put in extra funding for that as well. One thing that is not in there, for example, that we could put on the table as a negotiation is the class size mandate, right? Mm-hmm. Because the state passed a law where we have to lower the class sizes, which in theory, of course, all of us agree with. But to get to those lower class sizes is going to require us to hire additional teachers, more costs, perhaps physical outfitting of the schools. So that would be an additional $600 million request that we do have to the state. And so maybe there's a way to negotiate that as well.
Even though, because, and I mentioned this because the comptroller, we spoke to him this week, identified potential savings within schools. And now you're saying $600 million additional to meet the class size mandate, and all of that against the backdrop of the school population shrinking by all accounts.
Right.
We're not at 1.1 million. We're closer to 900,000, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So why do we? I'm trying to come at it from a standpoint of a New Yorker. Like, your school district's shrinking. You know, the comptroller says we can save money here. You're saying we need $600 million more dollars. I feel like people are like, well, where are the savings coming from?
Right. So actually, DOE is probably the agency that has one of the largest budgets. It's at about $40 billion, right? And so I think within that, for sure, we're going to be able to find savings perhaps on the administrative side. But in terms of meeting the additional class size requirements, because that is going to require more teachers, because we're having now 23, 25 students per class. And I think the challenge is going to be where are we going to put and find the space for them, but then also hire the teachers. And then the other option to save money perhaps is to say, can you give us sort of an exemption or waiver? Because we're supposed to hit certain targets this year. So maybe perhaps it's shifting that to some of the out years as well. So these are all things that we can talk about and discuss to sort of find savings in city agencies for sure. And so I think that's something that we want to sort of have conversations around before we get to this place where we're saying, let's increase everybody's taxes.
Is the council willing to make tough, unpopular choices? And I'll point to stuff that maybe budgetarily is not large, but the mayor has already made those choices in his proposal. He's allocating less money for libraries than he promised on the campaign. He's allocating less money for parks than he said on the campaign. And his spokeswoman is pointing to the tough financial times. Is the council also willing to say, it's tough, we may have to make those tough choices?
So we've been pretty clear that we believe that we're going to be able to find those savings without having to cut services. And, you know, for example, the library funding is something that we on the council fought really, really hard to put back into the budget over the last several years when the previous mayor had tried cutting library funding. And so we were able to find that money to put back into the budget to not cut library services and still be able to balance the budget. So I think there's money for sure. I mean, we're talking about a $118 billion budget right now for FY26. And so I think it's definitely possible to find funding to provide all the necessary services without having to actually sacrifice.
One of the things I've heard from people when I'm talking to them about this situation is I think people have a tough time understanding. You just mentioned $118 billion. That was the past budget last year. I just want to make sure I get my numbers right.
Yes.
Okay. And the mayor's proposing $127 billion.
Right.
So we've got a $9 billion difference and somehow a $5 billion deficit. I just feel like New Yorkers balancing their own checkbooks are like, what are you guys doing?
Right.
Do you feel that frustration?
I do. And to be honest, our numbers on the city council side, because we have our own numbers that we're going to be coming out with in response to the preliminary budget. And we always knew that that $12 billion deficit that the mayor was talking about
initially about a month ago
was not actually a real $12 billion deficit, in the sense that we knew that there were revenues coming in. Wall Street is doing better than projected. Revenues are up. And so we know that there's more money that's going to be coming in. Yes, there are certain question marks we don't know yet on the expense side, like with the city FEPs and the vouchers and the Carter cases, which add to the expenses on the city side. But even with that, our numbers are projecting a smaller deficit than what the mayor has projected. And so we've already seen it, case in point, because it went from 12 to 7. And then now it's at 5.4.
Do you have any sense of what the real bottom line number is going to be? Is it $3 billion? Is it $2 billion? I mean, how much further down is it slipping?
Yeah, we're not. I don't want to put the cart before the horse because we're still doing our analysis, but we do think it's going to be lower than the 5.4 billion. And so I think that for this year, for finishing out and closing out FY26, I do believe that we are going to be able to balance the budget. I think the question that we have is how is that going to look in the out years, the next few years, with the federal cuts that we know are coming. And to your point, the $127 billion, there's still numbers in the FY27 budget that we're not sure of. For example, the mayor has proposed a community safety plan, and those numbers are not yet in the budget yet for next year. So it'll be curious to see. It's we're keeping an eye out, obviously, but we're looking to see what some of those added expenses are going to be, given, some of the campaign promises that he made and things that he wants to put in.
So you're talking about the Department of Community Safety, which seems like it would cost more money, but also could just be housing certain agencies and functions under a different umbrella, and you got to find out what the impact is, right?
Right, exactly. Because we do have a lot of similar programs already that exist that are, I've noticed, components of the community safety plan. For example, a lot of the mental health outreach services, homeless services. We have Be Heard already that's in place. That's now going to be shifted over to H&H to fully administer that program, because it used to be housed under 4 or 5 different agencies, and so now they're shifting it over to H&H, which makes sense to me. And so it's about how is that going to look when it's repackaged, and are there going to be additional costs to what's there right now?
I'll end with a conversation about policing. The mayor, to be fair, did what he said on the campaign trail. I know there's some conservative media that's hammering him for it right now, but having actually covered his campaign, I can tell you he said he's going to land the police uniform number where he's landed it in this budget, and he's going to attempt to slash the overtime, which he did in this budget. Is the council in alignment with that, keeping the uniformed officer number at around 35,000 and seeking to slash police overtime? What does the council feel about that proposal?
So that is an area that I know that the speaker has spoken about in support of what the commissioner had mentioned also, because Jessica Tisch did say that she wanted to come out with this plan to sort of cut costs on the overtime and make sure that it's more efficient. And so that's another form of savings that we could be seeing in the budget. And of course, we're not looking to lower the number of officers, and keeping it the same is something that we would want for sure.
But you're okay with the pullback on the expansion because essentially former Mayor Adams, put the police department on track to reach about 40,000, and Mayor Mamdani, again, in fairness, as he promised, is pulling that back. Is the council in alignment with that?
I don't know about if the council's in line with that. I think people have different thoughts on that. But one thing I can say is that, in a time where New York is really wanting to get back on its feet. I do know that at least in my parts of Queens, for example, they do, public safety is top of mind for a lot of New Yorkers. And so we'll have to wait and see how that's going to pan out. And obviously we'll continue to have conversations with colleagues on the council about what that's going to look like in the budget. So, and one final thing I will say just to add is that I just also wanted to touch upon the fact that I know in the preliminary budget, the mayor's also talked about drawing down on reserves and the city reserves, which actually has never happened. It's very unprecedented. There are years where we don't necessarily add funding into the reserves, but there's never been a moment where we've taken money and drawn down from the reserves. Even during COVID, even during the migrant crisis, we were able to balance the budget without touching the reserves. And so,
and he's not just talking about the reserves, he's talking about the retiree healthcare fund as well.
Exactly. Right, exactly. And so that's part of that. And that is not something that we want to touch. And we feel that, just as I've mentioned before, we feel that there are definitely ways for us to balance the budget without having to touch those reserves.
Okay. Councilmember Linda Lee, Finance Chair of the City Council. I'm sure we're going to be hearing from you a lot the next few days or months, I should say. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And that'll do it for this edition of PIX on Politics Daily. I'm Henry Rossoff. Dan Mannarino has the big show tonight, PIX on Politics at 6:30 on Friday with a re-air on Sunday morning. So please do check that out. And I'm wishing you a good day.